Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's live stream. My keyboard's a bit messed up, so the title's going to look like this. Okay. So it begins. Attaining the ultimate excellence of human existence. Or if we can polish the title a bit more, the attempt of a lifetime at ultimate excellence. Dear viewers, I want to begin like this by saying that a majority of what we feel is happening in the world is happening in the domain of our own interpretation. What that means is it's like you got to put something in to get something out, and in some sense the human being's experiences sculpt the identity and the personalities that arise. Humanity has evolved, and after 4 billion years the science project is left. There was a time where, for many years actually, I was occupied with wondering about the meaning of existence, the meaning of life. I wondered, was it something to just use up while you have the time, or is it something, or is there something more? And so I find this to be the truest blessing when the world wakes you up beyond how your mind has awakened the world. What that means is your eyes have opened this world into meaning. Even though this world has opened your eyes, your objective eyes, but there is something within the form where we say life form. Like there's a difference between like any form and then a life form. The life form has, in some sense, an animated intelligence. There is something animating it. Right now, as I'm speaking, there is something moving here. Now, the depth and the scope of what is actually here, it will lead us to different contexts. For me, I thought knowledge was something to learn. How foolish was I? Knowledge is a sky you navigate in because you can only know things in relation to other things. Your sense of self right now is dependent on the sense of everything else that is not yourself. So immediately the language threshold is discovered. The veil of thoughts is discovered. How language is making up for the unknown elements of reality is discovered. There's this unique Tibetan story in some sense about okay, to continue. This codependence in the subjective realm of the being is very crucial to comprehend because it is the axis of belief. All belief systems exist in a dualistic setting. Because if the dualistic setting was not there, the whole spectrum would be accessible. That would mean there is no difference between the sides. What that means is night and day are separate. Without night, there would be no day. Without day, there would be no night. Similarly, as the poet Rumi suggests, the mind is in some sense like a bird has two wings, a wing of chaos, a wing of order. That means your mind requires chaos and order to play around for there to be a story of wonder. Excitement has to exist from the unknown. And so belief has a different kind of sense that our civilization for now it cannot believe properly. It gets what that means is a person believing something, it's not that they're wrong, it's not that they can't, it's just that how many moments of their lifetime is going to be occupied but with their attention on that construct, on that conceptual construct, on that thought construct. You see, I have personally, just as a child on this earth, my name was very important for me. That means it's like a person's name is kind of like, that's like you require a name to be an individual. in people's minds, at least to some degree. There needs to be a containment of the self. In this kind of story I wanted to share, this Buddhist story, it was actually even before the time, I think, of the Buddha. It could, because when Buddha came into history, when this child Gautama Siddhartha opened his eyes on this world, prior to him there was a context of a sort of ceremonial relationship with God. That means he woke up, his eyes woke up on this planet at a time where many people were ceremonially trying to attain some sort of ultimatum, you know. And so Buddha tried many paths. Don't think he just sat by a tree suddenly. He tried many paths, and there's a story, he came up to a group of people, and he saw those people, in some sense, their feet are connected to a rope and they're swinging from a tree. And Buddha's like, what are you guys doing? And these guys are like, we're worshiping truth, man. This is our way to God. And Buddha looks at him and he's like, you guys are not practitioners of truths, external phenomena. It is a disservice to your intelligence. You know, it's because it's like the wind that moves the sails. And in some sense, there is an inspiration of a constant updating of vision going on. Anyways, Buddha even takes the ascetic approach, and he starves himself through a sort of ceremonial practice back in the day, where the people, by starving themselves, they wanted to see God. They thought by getting closer to death they would see truth, yet they saw nothing. And so there's this story where the Buddha, in some sense, uh, he is literally on the brink of death. His skin is on his bones in a ridiculous way, as if he hasn't eaten for weeks, and he's perishing. And as Buddha is standing there perishing, he suddenly realizes this ceremonial practice, this way to truth, is wrong. So in some sense, his identity breaks again. Now, in that moment, suddenly, out of nowhere, miraculously, this girl appears and brings him a bowl of rice. And so Buddha eats that bowl of rice and somehow comes back to life, and his journey continues. Eventually, he sits by a tree. He feels there is no way to escape the suffering. And as he sits down in the stillness and silence of this man, there is a sort of kind of divinity. There's this very sacred thing Buddha did. Buddha, it's like he was one of the first people who, in some sense, saw beyond his mind. And to see beyond your mind doesn't mean you see another world. Sometimes people want to go to heaven because they don't like how it is on earth. Seldom do they realize heaven and hell are zones of attention. If you exist in attention, you're a phenomena. If you exist in, for example, hell, there's a attention moving, and if you exist in heaven, there's an attention moving. So the movement of the attention seems to be continuous, even after, if we entertain the notions of the Abrahamic religions, it would be, it's like even if the person goes to heaven and hell, there's a continuity of this animated intelligence. You see, many religions, they evoke the notion of the soul in the mind of the follower. So the follower is living, thinking this is a transcendental universe. There's something going on here, and it has a will. It's as if, imagine this whole planet was like a turtle's back, and the turtle was alive. In the same way, human beings are seeing a sort of collective mover of their individual thoughts in some sense. And so anyways, for me, language must be treated as a structure. When I speak of things, I am again navigating my attention through them, you know. If you notice, the way I speak is sometimes it's different, and it's not just based on the cultural influences of how I was raised. It's also because my mind shifted after some point in this life, where I stopped seeing language first, then images. From my mind became a observer. And the thing is, when the mind observes itself, it has to come to the resolution of an attributeless contentment. This attributeless contentment is chaotic. That means it's mysticism. It sounds liberating, yet the process to liberation means that the eyes must move beyond the chaos that holds them. And so what I'm trying to get to in some sense is that the attention of humanity is finds itself to be defined by one, how the world defines it and how it defines the world, and time, space, and all the considerations of dimension, all the kind of libraries of knowledge, they are man's imposition upon the world. But strangely we find it to kind of oscillate in the sense that it's as if man thinks free will is here. Suddenly free will realizes it's the will of the universe that is here. So who am I to tell this planet to turn the other way? Yet in my mind it could, but in front of me it turns one way. And so that's the beauty of materiality, that it happens in one way. It is the identification of the singular dimension. That means it's like this world is remarkable. Sometimes I look at gravity and it brings a tear to my eye. That if there was not the force of gravity, there would not be the journeys of man. There would not be ever, and nobody would care for someone to climb Mount Everest. And in some sense, it would be one of those situations where the conditions of the design of the evolutionary awareness find themselves. Like you find yourself in a moment where you realize it doesn't matter if there's a story or not to your existence. It is just here. It being here is so simple. It is so simple that language has sold a different story to you. It is so simple that's why they called it Satchit Ananda. It was this subtle alertness that it's like you realize this moment is conscious existence. And so there's a bliss that arises from that when consciousness no longer is fighting, with existence, and existence is no longer fighting with consciousness. That means matter and thought are no longer in this eternal war where the karmic wheel's kind of momentum is generated from that. You free your mind from archetypes where you think they are archetypes, then you will see they are you. This is something Carl Jung, I don't know, he probably, I think at the end of his life, definitely acknowledged. But it's one of those things where the common understanding of people of Carl Jung, they fall short. It falls short. Let me tell you why. Because Carl Jung conceived of this notion that the personality is kept by these archetypes. So think of archetypes as these various lines intersecting one point. So right now, whoever I feel I am, or any other human being, whoever they feel they are, if Carl Jung was here, they would see that it's these various roles throughout the life of the being that have been developed, as if it's the archetype of the mother, the archetype of the father, the archetype of the brother, the archetype of the civilian, the archetype of, in some sense, the tyrant, and so there's many ways, many values that the mind generates and keeps in reality. But the thing is, Carl Jung would realize those archetypes will eventually be the viewer. There is something else here. This is why this is Mr. Within's approach. I realized when I looked at philosophy, you know what I saw? When I looked at history, you know what I figured out? Every human being has been attempting to see it all. The greatest minds, they have attempted something. They have attempted something new. That's when your life becomes a calling. It's as if your eyes suddenly realize why they are open. You see, you know the values of some system, you can move in the system very easily. If you don't know the values in that system, it will become difficult. Okay? Now, this applies to everything. The reason I say everything, because it has to do with the, think of it this way, the data processing ability of your own intelligence. So think of it this way, every day waves of data are hitting you. When people speak, just forget who they are, who's speaking, and just conceptually acknowledge the content of their speech. Because I'm telling you, we are natural beings, therefore there is many natural ways we're existing which are still being kept by the unconscious rhythms of nature. Once we bring these into consciousness, it gives us an ability that is not conceivable at first, but in front of your eyes we see the only life we can live. And so is reality all about a sort of fantasy to the other side? You know, there's this joke, they say, why did the chicken cross the road? And the answer is to get to the other side, and most people don't realize by the other side they mean heaven. You know, that's like the ultimate punchline of the joke. And so what that means is the simulation must be engaged with to some degree. You know, you cannot avoid where your eyes are, you know. For me, I don't know, most people, I think they don't care, but but for me, when I truly saw the value of, for example, the internet, it brought a tear to my eye, because in some sense I realized what technology gave us was in the dreams of our ancestors. I saw various cultures, you know. I saw various ways the world is behaving, or parts of the world are behaving. And I just wondered, what is the meaning? What is the meaning behind all this? The nature of time is best kind of the hourglass kind of symbol we find in history. Like when you want to show time is kind of moving, we see an hourglass. Now, the beauty of the hourglass is that we see the sands of time, you know, slipping by. We find, and if one's poetic imagination and could in some sense embrace this image and see that each of those sands falling in the hourglass is in some sense opportunities of living that are either engaged or not engaged. I find there's certain things, it's like we cannot define a person's intelligence, first of all. Second, but we can see the result of the intelligence. And so it's like, think of it this way. Albert Einstein has this incredible quote. He says, oh God, what's the quote? Something like, if you judge a fish by its ability to fly, that fish will go on thinking its whole life it's stupid, something like that, you know? So what it means is that sometimes the lack of intelligence is a misalignment with the environment. You know, sometimes who you think you are is just a passing thought. This is pretty much Zen, you know. There was this I don't know who it was. I think it was Dogen in his childhood. I don't know. There was this epic Zen master who, when he was a kid, he was in a Zen monastery, okay? And he breaks this important vase accidentally. He was kind of like running around and being a kid, and suddenly he breaks this very precious vase, and suddenly he sees the masters walking down from the hallway. So he immediately picks up all the pieces of the vase and holds it behind him so the master can't see. And he goes to the master and says, "Master, please tell me, what is death?" And the master's like, "Whoa, this little kid, this little Zen monk kid wants to know the truth of death and what it is. I'm fascinated." The teacher's like, "Incredible question." And the teacher gave an answer. I don't know what answer. He gave probably, like, I think the answer was something like, it's an inevitable kind of process where once you accept it, the suffering goes away, or something like that. You know, something profound, the Zen master says. And this kid who broke the vase suddenly shows the vase and he says, "Thank you for the teaching, master. Your vase died." And the Zen master's like, "This little punk, you know, is enlightened, you know." What that means is the level, it has to do with alertness. That's it. Alertness to the most important value is the peak of survival. And this value will inevitably be understood to be collective. You're going to see, imagine you right now had everything you wanted. You know, imagine you were in heaven, but everybody in the world could not. Only you could go. Now, you could go, but then there would come this thought, what about the species? You know, what about this design? To be honest, the actual Vedic story I wanted to share was this one where I never got to it. Um, in this story, there's a man who is ceremonially, back in the day, like think of thousands of years ago or something. Like this man is ceremonial more than 2,000 years ago, guys. Like think of like 3,000 years ago. I think that's more accurate. Like 2,600 years ago, imagine. I think that's even closer. But anyways, how the story goes is that there's this man sacrificing goats to some divine agency or purpose. One day he goes to sacrifice this goat, you know, like it's his 500th goat, you know, goat he's killing. And so in that moment where he comes to kill the goat suddenly, in some sense, starts laughing, you know. And suddenly this guy who's about to kill the goat freaks out and he's like, "This goat is laughing." And he looks at the goat and he talks to it and says, "Why are you laughing?" And the goat says, "Because 500 lifetimes ago," no, he says, "Because this is my last lifetime, I will no longer be a goat after this." And then the man's like kind of shocked. This goat is laughing because this is its last lifetime as a goat, you know? And then suddenly the goat starts crying. And then the man suddenly like freaks out even more and says, "Goat, why are you crying?" And in some sense, the goat suddenly says, "Because 500 lifetimes ago, I was a man who was in some sense sacrificing goats ceremonially. And this man suddenly becomes the defender of goats all around the land. He suddenly realizes the loops of life that are initiated due to the person's lack of attention to actually what is here." There's only one definition for true intelligence: seeing what's going on. I think that could be a measure, like a measuring factor for IQ. But anyways, I don't know. These are just viewpoints, you know. Sometimes when I give these talks, it's like I see an unknown sky and I immediately, you know, and like create a spear and throw that spear into that unknown sky. Life gets boring if you don't try to live it, you know. By the way, the reason I chose this picture is not because red is one of my favorite colors, but at the same time, there's a sort of beauty to the architecture of the picture. And so there's a concept I speak about where I call it the pillars of civilization. And it's this long thing I'm writing. I haven't finished it at all. But the idea is the pillars of civilization is this notion that there must be certain values that must, and if these pillars of civilization are kept, I want people to imagine these columns like not like similar to these Greek columns, but imagine huge. Suddenly, every generation is adding their own contribution. Knowledge is like a kind of bunker where all the explorers kind of have come back and are sharing what their findings. That should be the true nature of the educational system. And I like a sort of militaristic approach to education. When I say militaristic approach, I don't mean like teachers being strict in classrooms and breaking the kids' natural identity to create a more efficient, unnatural one. I'm saying that we need to have a sort of hierarchy of skill levels. These hierarchy of skill levels will immediately bring, imagine, how would I say it? Like, imagine a kid is born that plays just like Mozart. That kid suddenly can, his skill level can take him to his, how can I tell you, to his class, to his educational class. The idea that something continues more than the brain is at first a kind of shocking idea, but after that shock is confronted, it becomes an incredible idea. And the notion is of the continuity of intelligence regardless of its manifest qualities. So right now you're primarily a creature that is defined by your sensory perception. Even I am right now as I'm speaking, like it's my senses. You know, I'm sitting on a balcony, I feel the breeze, um, I drink iced tea. And this sensory data, for most people, it is their life is based on it. But to wonder about what there is more than this, at first you realize it is not another external thing, so it cannot be conceptual. That is the puzzle. That's the Rubik's Cube of mysticism. How do you get out of a conceptual illusion? And so, the easiest way these meditators kind of found, mystics found, was to be still and silent. That was their path. But Mr. Within is now seeing civilization is not just still and silent. People are being pulled by many forces. Even the whole consumerist mentality is just a sort of desire gratification system. You see? It's one of those things where I see because there's an advanced a sort of process of advancement of communication going on. It's like not only as human beings emerge, more human beings are born, more personalities are entering the system, the planet's behavior. But in some sense, we are building ourselves macrocosmically. And to be honest, I have no idea how the audience will hear that statement, but I'll say it like this. It's a study of behavior, and then the study of the inspiration of the behavior, and then the recognition that the external is kept by inner pillars, by inner foundations. When you go to see that inner foundation, you come to the prime awareness. The prime awareness is like a sort of the way it is. It's like a viewer. Literally, it's an observance of the moment. It has nothing to do with how the body is. It has nothing to do with how your thoughts are. It is just how what is here is here. It is existence's edge behind your mind. And so once you come to that point, it's like the subjective and the objective realm are being witnessed simultaneously. So you neither think you are like a soul who has a body, and you neither think you're a body who could have a soul or could not have a soul. These paradigms, these stories kind of break. Every story breaks. There isn't much you can really say after that sentence. Yeah. Sun Tzu has this very nice quote. He says, ultimate excellence lies in not winning every battle, but in defeating the enemy without ever fighting. Which means the best solution is an instantaneous one. The most efficient outcome a person can get to their problem is for it to instantly cease to exist. And so they have to get rid of the interior factors, their own relationship with the problem, and then the actual problem that is there. Many voices echo in this world. Many viewpoints visit the minds of people. But eventually you'll see the treasure of the physical body may be in financial wealth or something. But the treasure of the mind can only be in one area, and that is knowing. How you know things, how you know you're knowing, and how much you have actually observed what is here, and to what degree is the moment objective, to what degree is the moment subjective, to what degree is the moment simply the moment before you define it. I've had memories of my childhood before I learned language. It was just very easy. It was just a moment of sight. So I realized fundamentally, because language emerges out of silence through noise, and intelligence, what we call it, is the movement of beings. So it seems that the silence and stillness, where movement and noise arise and can be acknowledged, is how the observer is acknowledged. The observer is like the opposite of everything that is seeing. Not the opposite, it is outside of it. Right now, I see this computer in front of me. The shaman in Native American sort of metaphysics, you can say, was a person who was in communication with the living spirit. And when I say the living spirit, I'm not saying it in a Christian context. I'm saying it in the sense that they saw life being alive. The secular society looks at a tree and doesn't see it alive in the same way it is, you know, which is this fundamental arrogance of not realizing you are seeing in others what you experientially have attained. Which means that in some sense anger was a fool's errand simply because nobody could ever see through each other's eyes. The agreement had to be a new level of tolerance, a new. Just think of it this way. Imagine you're negotiating. For me, negotiation is a playful thing. Iran, India, Turkey, like those areas, you know. If you don't kind of like negotiate when you buy something from a local store, or you don't like try to have a sort of banter to get the price down, they don't respect you. It's like, and so it's this playful thing. It's like communication to to the Western mind may be something that everybody wants to do in an excellent way, but in certain kind of cultures where education is per se not too shaped, the way they there's more. It's like the behavior and the body language is more. Do you see? For example, I'll say the truth. An Italian girl compared to an English girl has a totally different level of comfort, for example, with the physical environment. And simply because certain values are culturally allowed and are culturally non-allowed. When you understand, when you not understand, when you see this show, it's kind of like a kind of state of mind the mystic would arise to. Where life would become a game. That means you suddenly saw it's like everybody was acting. Society is a great play. And that's why you see a lot of comedy and tragedy. Zen Master Dogen has this quote where he says, to study Buddha's way, Buddha's path, you must study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to awaken to the nature of all things. And I consider that to be a sort of, that's a wise person in my eyes, where the secrets of nature have become the movement of their eyes. I feel there's going to be like in it's as if poetry's had a decline, the authenticity factor in poetry. Poetry used to be a sort of kind of people trying to share their deepest visions. What's up, man? Hey guys, I gotta continue this in part 2. Much blessings.